I'm just going to start reading. I'm just going to start reading a few minutes from a couple different passages to give a sense of how this book happened in the first place and why I wrote it, and also a little bit about what I think it's become from that initial motivation. So I'm going to read a few passages from The Least We Can Do, which was the original chapbook. And then I'm going to read a few passages from the first essay in the collection of Reader's Introduction to Bookselling. So this is from The Least We Can Do. When Sean Spicer was given prime billing at Book Expo America, and Milo Yiannopoulos tried to publish a book with Simon & Schuster, I churned out 40 pages of text about free speech, white supremacy, and independent bookstores over the next several months, returning to it now and then as a salve or outlet for my frustration, and then just let it sit. I should have written something even earlier, after I had been in bookselling for 10 years and watched Republicans and conservatives profiting, in terms of money and power, off the racist backlash to the Obama administration. Someone should have written something even earlier, as we watched the Bush administration start two endless wars, institute torture as an official American practice, and completely remake American society after the trauma of 9/11. Someone should have written something when Rush Limbaugh's first book was published, before the reactionary racism of right-wing talk shows became fully mainstream. Like so many white liberal Americans, I thought the gains made during the civil rights movement were secure, and that even if there was still a long way to go towards true social and racial justice, at least we weren't sliding back. It's embarrassing. Only the thinnest veils were thrown over the racism of the war on drugs, criminal justice reform, and welfare reform. Even after the Tea Party rose to power almost entirely through the white grievance and racism stoked by Fox News. Even after the Republican Party formally embraced this radical version of themselves. I did not see a resurgent threat, and I did not see my complicity in that resurgence. Donald Trump was president in part because the media, publishers, bookstores, book reviewers, readers, and everyone with power and influence in books decided it was okay to sell books by Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly, Ann Coulter, Tucker Carlson, and all the other right-wing pundits and politicians, monetizing and legitimizing the white supremacist ideas they expressed and providing a platform for those ideas to reach more people. Donald Trump was president because we did not take responsibility for our own decisions. Donald Trump was president because we did nothing when con artists monetized white grievance, white fear, and white supremacy. Most of us took some of that money. Some of us took a lot of that money. Donald Trump was president because the conservative movement over the last 30 years broke our political media's bullshit detector. Donald Trump was president because people like Newt Gingrich, Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, and, well, Donald Trump himself were taken seriously, as if they were honestly participating in American political discourse. Donald Trump was president because publishers and bookstores showed readers that we believe those people and ideas deserve to be taken seriously. Whatever we do going forward, we can no longer pretend that we are innocent. Donald Trump put children in cages. We can no longer act as though book sales do not have ethical and moral components. Donald Trump sabotaged the national response to COVID-19, killing hundreds of thousands of people. We cannot pretend that it does not matter who we help make money. A Confederate flag was waved in the Capitol building during a violent insurrection that killed 6 people. We cannot pretend that we don't have some responsibility over what ideas are discussed in public discourse. I apologize for waiting this long to take this small step within my industry. I apologize for not listening to what many, many people had tried to tell me and all of white America about the threat to our country. I apologize for prioritizing avoiding interpersonal conflict with friends, family, and colleagues over confronting a persistent and deadly threat. I don't know if what I've written here will make a big difference. I don't know if independent bookstores have enough power to make a big difference in the fight against white supremacy, other supremacist ideologies, and fascism in America. But we have some power. And if we don't fight, we can't win. So that's why this book happened. And here is what it became over the course of writing it and thinking about it. And this is from a reader's introduction to bookselling. If books are important to you because you're a reader or a writer, then how books are sold should be important to you as well. If it matters to you that your vegetables are organic, your clothes made without child labor, your beer brewed without a culture of misogyny, then it should matter how books are made and sold to you. This collection isn't the jungle for bookselling, and I don't spend that much time on how the sausage gets made. But I do pull back the curtain a bit on these spaces that are so important to readers and writers. For readers, you'll be able to see some of the discussions and decisions that create these spaces in your communities, as well as some of the debates over how those spaces should be created and maintained. You'll also learn some of the challenges bookstores face in terms of meeting their individual missions, staying open as individual stores, and staying important and sustainable as an industry. Furthermore, by seeing how stores communicate with readers through the use of space, stock, events, social media, and via personal conversations, and by learning some of the ideas and terms that dictate and organize our efforts, you'll be a better bookstore customer. It will be easier for you to find what you're looking for. You'll ask better questions and get better answers. You'll be more able to support your local store without having to spend any extra money. For writers, I think it is important to your careers to have a better understanding of that last link in the chain that brings books from your brain to readers. I hope this conversation will be enlightening, or at least interesting to everyone, like sneaking out of a brewery tour and eavesdropping on the actual brewers chatting about their latest batch, or taking a wrong turn in the museum and overhearing the curators discussing their next exhibit. Reading this book won't teach you everything you need to know about how to become a successful bookseller, because that's not the goal of the book. I don't know everything there is to know about being a successful bookseller, and there is no one way to be a successful bookseller. Furthermore, what it means to be a bookstore and how to succeed at being a bookstore has changed many times over the years and will likely change again. Many of my ideas could be out of date in the next few years, but armed with them now, you can at least dip your toe in the conversation. And the next time you walk into a bookstore, you'll have a better understanding of everything that goes on behind the scenes. Thank you all. Evan, I think you're muted.
There we go. I'm no longer muted. Freedom of speech, that's what we're talking about here. All right, so it started with the manifesto, but what the book, reading it really reminds me, do you know, was it the Latte's book, the Rebel Booksellers and the Yellow Lighted Bookstore? Because in the second reading, you were really talking about this is the way, this is how the sausage is being made in a way, that what's actually going on in a bookstore. It really was interesting reading that sort of perspective on how people are thinking about it. I want to ask you a couple of things about that, because one of the things you say is, you point out, we don't see only with our eyes, we see with our expectations. And you're talking about what it means to go into a bookstore and what the place does. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about your sense of that, the bookstore as a location, as a place that you expect.
So the term, I think this term will be familiar to many people on this call, is third places. These are spaces that are neither home nor work, that allow you to kind of exist as a human being. And they are a vital part, I think, to being a human being. We need to be places where we are neither caring for someone or doing labor for someone else, where we are neither interacting with people who are, vitally important to us, nor completely alone. And bookstores are an absolutely are one of the great places for that. And as so much of the kind of commons get privatized, and as space gets continually restricted to places where you've got to buy something, you've got to buy a ticket to get in, those places where you don't have to buy something, where you don't have to buy a ticket, become even more important. One of the big challenges I think bookstores face is working with those expectations of what a bookstore is that you mentioned, Evan. Some people assume all bookstores are, that classic dusty used bookstore where the shelves are crammed, there are piles of books everywhere. There are, there's the Bernard Black style of bookseller is sitting behind the counter. And for some readers, that's the right space for them. For other readers, that's not a terribly accessible space. There's not enough room for them to move the way they're able to move. They are looking for, they're looking for more light to be able to see and enjoy the space. They would like to have a conversation with someone who seems to want to be there. And so it's important for stores to both be available for the expectations of their communities, and also arrange that space so that the communities are led to other things and to broaden their expectations, and to understand that bookstores can be a lot of things for a lot of people. I think libraries have a similar challenge in some ways. People expect them to be just books, whereas libraries, at least in the United States, have become absolutely vital community centers that do tons of other things. And so for the bookseller, the goal is to leverage existing expectations, but in a way that allows you to build out from them to something more and to something sustainable, to something greater.
You talk about identity, don't you? Shared identity with the customers and the like. How does the bookstore create that identity, do you think? The kind of the primary way is through their stock, through what books they carry. As you all know, hundreds of thousands of books are published every year, and there isn't a bookstore in the world that can carry all of them. And so we make a statement of our values, strongly in some stores, more kind of delicately in other stores, by what we stock. And you know what a store cares about, by what's on their shelves, by the 30,000 or 10,000 or 5,000 books out of all the hundreds of thousands of books that they choose to carry. And then the next level is within that set, what books they choose to highlight, what is spaced out, what is in stacks, what gets shelf talkers, what is stack picks. And so for the kind of the first time entrant into a bookstore, looking at what's spaced out, what's stack picked will tell you pretty much everything you need to know about what the store thinks they are, and what readers they most value, and what communities they most hope to connect with. And then we have social media, newsletters, and everything else in the conversations that after that. But that's still all I think draws from our stock and our space. And yeah, going back to your manifesto, how does the identity of the bookstore allow you to fight back in the sort of ways that you're describing fighting back?
So bookstores are also
not having books as well as having books.
Part of building community is also deciding who is not going to be part of your community. And just like you can't have every book in every store, you can also welcome every community to your store. You can't be everything to everyone. And as we think about that, we have to remember that bookstores are platforms, and that when we choose to carry a book, we make it convenient to purchase. We legitimize it in some way. I'm not saying that I think every single book that, say, Porter Square Books carries is a book I personally like, or that I think is necessarily a good book within kind of how I define them. But we've decided that they have value to our community. And I think over the years, it has become clear that there are some ideas that still have a lot of traction, a lot of popularity, a lot of engagement, that I don't think are terribly valuable to the discourse in our country and in our politics. They don't add anything. They don't tell us anything we don't know. And engaging with them doesn't help us produce more truth. All that we do when we platform them is give those who use them to their advantage, or those who can make wealth off of them, the opportunity to do both of those things. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is the best place, the most effective place to deplatform white supremacist and fascist ideas and other bigotries is actually not at the bookstore level, it's at the publisher level. Because unlike a bookstore, someone at the publisher has read every single book that they have published. Several people usually over the course of the book's life. And so, they are the ones who have the most tools and the most knowledge to be able to say, okay, this actually is not something that's going to help us understand the world better. This is actually not something that is going to, provide kind of intellectual, emotional sustenance to people. This is not going to, and in fact, this is going to empower those who seek to take that sustenance away from others. And so, the chapbook, The Least We Can Do, was kind of my figuring out, okay, the bookstore is not the best equipped to do this. So how can we use the equipment that we do have to, at the very least, not be active allies to the most destructive forces in the society that I identify? How do we, at the very least, not contribute to the problem any more than we absolutely have
to? Okay. And as a bookstore, as booksellers, and yes, we don't contribute to the problem, but how can a bookstore influence the publishers to push in that direction, do you think? Is the voice strong enough of the bookseller to influence the publisher in any way, given Amazon and the other platforms?
It's funny. Publishers will always tell us how important we are to them. We've all been to the lunches and the conferences and the workshops where someone from a publisher would tell us, all the things we kind of know about ourselves, that we are vital for discovery, that it is at independent bookstores where books and authors that take big risks and do things different and have the potential to surprise readers, that's where they find their first readership. Whether that kind of those statements translate into publishers changing their behaviors in response directly to things that we are doing, it is I don't know. I know at certain levels in publishing, there are people who absolutely value and enact, change their ideas, change their positions, change their decisions because of their relationship to independent bookstores. Whether those people actually attend the shareholder meetings, whether those people actually set budgets for imprints, I am not sure. But once again, this is going back to, we do what we can with the tools that we have. And the tools that we have are our space, our ability to display, and our ability to highlight and advocate for books. So it is absolutely possible for bookstores to at least change what is coming out of their channel. We just have to be a little bit more intentional. If we look at our new fiction display and all our stacked hardcovers, and all of them are white authors from Big Five publishers, that's not going to inspire much sense of change in those Big Five publishers. If all of our staff picks are books that are already selling well, that's not going to have a major impact. If the central display in our store is the bestseller display, again, that might be fine in terms of generating some sales for the store, but that's not going to influence what publishers see and what publishers understand as the value of our communities. And so what kind of I argue for is just intentional reading and intentional use of that space so that we advocate for the voices that need advocacy, and whose success that we contribute to will help change the more general publishing ecosystem.
And is this an economically, commercially viable pathway, do you find?
I think so. I mean, in my essay, Bookselling in the Real World, I take a look at the old bookselling phrase, stack 'em high, watch 'em fly, which basically means that if you stack a book as if it is going to sell well, the stack itself helps inspire sales. People get curious. People wonder why there are so many copies. People assume that because there are so many copies of the book, it must be good or it must be interesting, or people must already be reading it. And if stack 'em high, watch 'em fly is true, and I think it is. That means we do have an immense amount of influence over what people read. And this is before even factoring in how often people specifically come to independent bookstores looking to discover, looking to find the books they would not have otherwise. And so, yeah, I think not only is it a viable economically, not only do I think it will generate enough sales to kind of keep the doors open, I think leaning into that discovery might actually be a pathway to higher sales than just this kind of responsive, passive, we think it will sell style buying and displaying, because it creates an identity that is distinct for your store, because you'll probably be highlighting books that are different from other stores in your region, and certainly from Barnes and Noble and Amazon and I guess Waterstones, is that the one over, or Indigo if anyone's watching from Canada. And
Yeah.
it will help transform people who are just kind of customers who come in and get a book when they want one, when they know they want one, into community members who seek you out specifically for when they want to read something or just have that experience of being a community member.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned community a lot. You know, you describe a couple of the books. By the way, you've very effectively managed to sell the 500-page stream of consciousness novel that you managed
Yeah.
to get out there, because you advocated for it as a bookseller. I think. What about other booksellers? Are you getting positive feedback from what you're having to say, or is there resistance out there?
By and large, I'm getting very positive feedback. That might be some like self-selection bias. That might be kind of media bias. With the chapbook out, with myself active on social media, with myself, with being willing to speak at bookseller conferences and bookseller educations. I do suspect that at least some percentage of booksellers who disagree with me kind of knew it from the get-go, and did not engage with the book. I think there also tends to be some self-selection via media. So, a lot of what I discuss and a lot of what I think about is influenced directly by the interactions and the networking and the conversations happening on social media. And so they reflect those conversations pretty directly. For booksellers who aren't on social media, I think there's probably a greater chance that they would disagree with some of my ideas. But also they don't really have a good way to tell me. And so, the feedback that has gotten to me has been very positive. People have felt that I have articulated things that they were trying to articulate. Not necessarily new ideas, but given substance to ideas and conversations that are useful to them. And I've helped them have conversations with their staff, with their community in ways that they think are beneficial for their stores.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things you talk about a lot about is the indie bookstore movement and the role of indie bookstores, which, as you point out, the term indie doesn't necessarily describe the same sort of bookstore every time, which is an interesting point. But I was wondering, one of the arguments for indie is that keeps coming up is we're bring the money back into the community. It's a commercial thing. But I think you raised some other reasons why indies really are important, not just for commercial reasons, but within the community itself. They have a role within the community, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to that idea of third places, and not thinking specifically back to um, the night that Donald Trump won in 2016, and a lot of people were just in the store. They weren't shopping. They just needed to be outside of their house for a little bit, and they wanted to go to a place where they felt welcomed and safe, and valued, where they expected to find relatively like-minded, if not politically aligned, other people, not necessarily to have a conversation with, but just to be with. One of the things that one of the other pitches that independent bookstores have always made in our competition with Amazon is the idea that that sense of community is like a value added. It's like you're willing to pay the higher price for a book at our store because you get community. And as I've thought about that more, that's an oddly capitalist way to think about things. But also, when that community was taken away by the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns, I think it revealed that wasn't just a nice thing to have. That wasn't a bonus. That sense of community wasn't a fringe benefit. That sense of community is vital. It is an important part of being a human being and living, for most people, living their lives the way they want to in meaningful ways. Um, and we know this because people took a lot of risks to have it. Um, for better or for worse, people were willing to essentially put their lives on the line and the lives of other people on the line to have these spaces when maybe it was a little too dangerous to have them. And so, yeah, the fundamental economic argument for not just independent bookstores, but every locally owned store is that it keeps money in your local economy. It actually makes your spending as more productive for you than just getting your thing than spending at Amazon or a national or international store. But the broader argument, the broader kind of human argument is that people like these places. These places are important to people. For whatever reason, grocery stores tend not to be able to be these spaces. For whatever reason, clothing stores tend not to be able to be these places. I'm not saying they can't be; they just often aren't. Um, but bookstores often are. And so, if you want these spaces in your life, if you want to have the opportunities that they provide, even if you don't take advantage of them very often, you've got to keep them open.
Okay. I've got one more question. I'm going to open it up to the wider audience. But as a bookstore owner myself, your chapter on paying staff was really interesting to me. The idea that should we keep a business model that requires people to work for less than they can live on? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you dealing with that particular conundrum, which is fairly common in the industry.
Yeah, it is. One of the hardest things about bookselling is the way books are priced, the way they are discounted to us from the publishers, all of the expenses we have to bear. It's still in many places essentially impossible to pay a living wage at a bookstore. And the result of that is a lot of people who should be talented booksellers, a lot of people who should be able to make a career at bookselling, can't stay. They leave for industries with higher wages. They leave for industries with, at least in the United States, with better healthcare benefits. And that is, I think, a drag on our industry. If every couple of years you have to hire someone new and you lose 2.5 years of institutional knowledge, that's a cost. But also, when you lose the potential for someone to have 10 years of experience on the sales floor, 15 years of experience on the sales floor. I mean, we've all been in retail situations where at one time we've talked to someone who has clearly been there for 6 months, and we treat them with grace and courtesy for their work as well. But also talk to someone who has been there for years, and the difference is significant. Every store is going to have to face this a little bit different. A seasonal store that's only open in the summertime, for whatever reason, is going to face this differently than a store that's open all year round, a specialty store. And one of the reasons why I kind of brainstorm a bunch of different ideas for how to help bridge this gap between what is possible to, what won't put us in a situation where we end up on credit holds with our publishers, and also what is truly values the labor that is happening, is so that stores can kind of pick and choose. Or rather, I would be happy. I would not be upset at all if not a single bookstore anywhere took any of those ideas. I talk about an extra hour of paid reading. I talk about purchasing farm shares for stores. I talk about being closed the week after Christmas. It's just a bunch of other ideas. As long as stores were thinking creatively about the challenge. Because I think ultimately, one of the solutions to higher wages is actually higher wages. Is keeping staff long enough that they can start generating more value out of their experience and institutional knowledge. How stores get there, I can't speak to any specific store, But I think the important thing to me is that stores are beginning more and more and more to think about those questions and to really reset their perspectives and kind of think about wages much more as investments than as overhead.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of it, wages as investment, really interests me in terms of this. As you say, you get more value from an employee that's been there longer, a bookseller who's been there doing it. You're going to get better, more stuff out of them, so they're going to earn that wage. But you have to lose a little money up front, perhaps, as you. Yeah, it's a tough one for everybody. All right, I'd like to open it up to the other people in the room, virtually speaking.
Josh, I have just something I would like you to speak to a little bit, because what you were talking about, I've been in the business almost 30 years now, and it's really a paradigm shift. Like when I was a young bookseller, there was never discussion about whether or not to carry some of those political books, because it was, the idea was the First Amendment, right? It was not our responsibility to decide what the reader should or should not read. But at the same time, nobody was pointing out that, of course, we were still curating our inventory. We didn't have everything. And I remember vividly being in discussions about whether or not to carry certain books, and whether or not we're going to display them, or we're just going to put them spine out. And the other big secret to the books that you're talking about is that those sales are false. Right. There are a lot of bookstores who hold their nose, because what's happening is certain organizations are buying their way onto the New York Times list, and they're running sales, bulk sales, through independent bookstores on the down low to do that. And the books aren't going anywhere. People aren't actually reading them, so it's kind of it's creating this false sense that these books are being read and are popular. And a lot of bookstores just sort of held their nose because they needed that influx of $2,000 or $3,000, right? Yeah. And I know there's still bookstores that do that, right? And it's a big problem. So really that speaks to more, how can a bookstore balance, their ideals, their mission, with being constrained of working in a very capitalist system, and the wages play into that. It's a systemic problem in the United States, and bookstores can't solve it alone. Danny and Jeff Deutsch were talking about this at Heartland after you left, and some things that bookstores could do really is maybe more advocacy in general about changing the entire way, we do business as a whole in retail, and not just trying to fix it just within the bookstore. So if you want to comment or expand on that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple different generational forces that I think are at play and why things are shifting in independent book selling. One of the shifts is that we are kind of beyond that great indie die-off of the late 90s and early 2000s. Although there are many booksellers who are still in bookselling today who kind of went through that. And one of the things I talk about is how many folks, quite rationally, have imprinted a scarcity model. Have imprinted an idea that if they don't get those $2,000, $3,000 of those bulk sales for people who are, which are essentially funneling money to people who are doing things that hurt them, then they won't be able to stay open at all. Because there was a time when, that was the truth, where that $3,000 was whether you could make a payment to keep your credit open. But I think that's changed. I think that's changed for some harder reasons. I think a lot of, just because there are fewer independent bookstores than there were in 1993. I think they're changed for some really positive reasons. I talked about how COVID-19 has influenced how people value their community. I think the shop local movement that we talked a little about earlier, which was led in strong part by independent booksellers, has changed that. And so I think one difference is that we don't actually live in an era where book purchases are going to be a scarce commodity. I think we actually live in a time when book purchases have an opportunity to be extremely abundant. Some of the other things that have shifted that conversation, I think, are, for me, I'm 43, so I came up in political consciousness with the kind of late Clinton, but also specifically the George Bush administration. You learn a lot about what the American right tolerates and values and supports when you're a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old watching the Bush administration lie to the United Nations and start two wars. Um, and then, of course, from then on, we know who the next Republican president was. Um, and so I think for those of us who had our political consciousness kind of shaped Bush after, we think about the Republican Party differently. And I don't know if this works with if this maps as well with Labor and Tories in the UK, if it's the same thing, or some of the conservatives in other parts of the world. But there are still people who where their consciousness was in, or political consciousness came of age with a time when Republicans were more committed to actual governance, even if you didn't agree with what they were trying to pass, than whatever is happening now. I think the third thing, and it cannot be overstated, is that social media allowed for conversations with amongst booksellers who never were able to communicate before. And so what happened was those who were on social media realized that they were not the only ones asking these questions. They were not the only ones who were upset about how we were supporting these authors or these causes or these books. And some of those secrets started getting out. And we realized that there actually were a number of, for whatever kind of book buying orthodoxy or book display orthodoxy exists, there are actually a lot of different opinions about what we should do, how we should do it. And social media allowed those opinions to connect and coalesce. I don't think we're in the same place without Twitter, RIP, and other social media. Because now, I can talk with Danny Kane, co-owner of Raven Books, who wrote How to Protect Bookstores and 50 Ways to protect bookstores from Amazon, and again, and How to Resist Amazon. I can talk to him now, and I would not have been able to 15 years ago. And that has created a way for new ideas to kind of coalesce into not common sense, not even like orthodoxy, but major currents in thinking about bookselling. And I think that allows us to have these conversations that we weren't having before. And I think it's really good. I think it's great that we can have these networks and connections and difficult conversations, even if it's a medium that maybe we aren't all comfortable with or are permanent, as we have learned.
It's interesting with the conversations. One of the big things the Booksellers Association did here during COVID was get together booksellers together for online breakfasts and the like. And it was a really influential, impactful event for a lot of them. They're still carrying on with that being able to talk to other people in the same situation as you are, particularly with booksellers, I think. Do we have other questions? Anyone else want to? Samantha?
That is me. Hi, Josh. And apologies, this may be a question that is answered in the book, but I'm just going to sound aggrieved yet again, as it's not yet available in the UK. I'm just going to have to ask you this question. I love the title. Libromancy was not a word I'd ever come across before, so I'm just curious. How did you find that term, and why is it the title for your book?
Yeah. So it's true. It was really born out of social media for Portrait Square Books. And I go back and forth about how valuable it ultimately is. But my thinking was basically, Walmart sells books. Target is a bookseller. They sell books. Amazon is, of course, a bookseller. But they don't do the same things that we do. They don't do the intellectual and emotional labor that we do. And so the term bookseller, in some ways, felt inadequate. It didn't seem like it was descriptive enough for both what the work that we were doing and what people were getting out of that work. So bibliomancy is a term that's already taken. And so I just kind of, maybe a touch too clever for my own good, latched on to Libromancy as that kind of description. And I've gone back and forth with how often I use it. I think it's fun. I think it adds a little texture to the social media posts and the conversations we have that way. I like saying, the Libromancers at Porter Square Books every now and again. And so it just kind of existed in this as one of the kind of tools in my social media tool belt. And then I found myself writing a book about bookselling. And one that wasn't about you know managing margins and finances and the real kind of the book selling aspects of book selling. And so Art of Libromancy seemed like was the kind of obvious title. There were no notes from the publisher, no revisions from that, and so yeah, that's where it came from, and that's how we landed here.
Great. It is a great word. I mean, you can see it on tote bags, t-shirt, in terms of a further marketing stuff. I'm so there. So, and one more curious question, because I don't think you've quite answered this, but what was the push that made you go from thinking all this stuff and kind of enacting it in your daily life as a bookseller and actually thinking, right, do you know what, I need to write a book about this? What was it that gave you that momentum?
Yeah. So the publisher is Biblioasis. They're a publisher in Windsor, Ontario, in Canada. Great publisher. A couple of years beforehand, they had done a chapbook by Jorge Carrion called Against Amazon. And about a year or so after that, they expanded that into an essay collection. And they did a virtual launch for that event with a kind of visual video presentation from Jorge and a number of booksellers around the country talking about Biblioasis books, talking about Amazon. And it was at that event where I said, oh, this might be what I can do with all of this stuff. I could write a chapbook, and then I could see if maybe I could expand that chapbook into a book. So that event was in November or December of 2020. And so, the fact that I got anything done in the holiday season, I think I'm impressed with. But I was able to put together a pitch for an essay collection or a chapbook like Against Amazon, and then with a potential for an essay collection like they're Against Amazon. And I emailed it to Dan Wells, who I'd worked with as a bookseller, who's the publisher at Oasis. And I can tell you the exact date I emailed, pitched this project. It was January 6th of 2021. And I can tell you the exact day that Dan said, yeah, let's do it, because it was about 3 hours later on January 6th, 2021. So that was a very emotionally complex day for me. So yeah, it was seeing this other kind of structure for this discourse that showed me a way to kind of pull this all together, get it out of my head, and do something useful besides like keeping me up at night with it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you did write the book, even if I haven't been able to read it yet. Again, aggrieved from the UK. But that it is really helping. It's so nice to see so many books coming through now about the value of booksellers and bookshops. We need that. And I think from what you've been saying today, your book definitely is going to have an impact this side of the pond, as well as the impact it's already having in the US. So thank you. I'll hand back to you, Evan.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that it was a book about bookstores that wasn't all about the famous authors that came in or the other customers I didn't like. It was a bit more about what it is actually like to be in a bookstore on a day-to-day basis. It was lovely. Anyone else want to raise any issues, questions?
If I may, Josh, I have one more question, because I would value your opinion on this. You're talking about, accessibility for the community and the third space in the bookstore and how important that is. And I'm coming at that from a slightly different angle. And I had written a piece for Shelf Awareness a few months back about my experiences as a sales rep, and how a lot of these new bookstores I was worried about that had opened in the past couple of years, because they did not have the same accessibility in the resources or the ability to take advantage of the resources to learn the book trade. You know, and in the past, it's always been something that's sort of been passed down through generations, or working in a bookstore, which is not always accessible for people. Some of these booksellers they don't have any employees. They can't leave to go to a trade show and attend education sessions, right? Or they have other jobs, or they, you know, they're from marginalized communities that are not plugged into the weird ways that we do business. And so as a younger bookseller, I would appreciate knowing your thoughts on trying to, for those of us who's been in the industry a long time, help these newer bookstores succeed for 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. One of the exciting things that is happening is people are finding newer ways to bookstore ownership than there have been in the past. Stores starting as pop-ups, stores starting as online only, stores using crowdsourcing to generate funding. There's someone who started as organizing book clubs in New York, who is now selling T-shirts on Bonfire to fundraise for establishing a bookstore. So on the one hand, there is some really exciting and cool things happening with the establishment of new bookstores. That said, a lot of the same challenges persist. You know, for example, credit limits at publishers can make things very difficult for new bookstores, and too often, new bookstores, especially first 2 years, end up having to rely entirely on Ingram, which has some advantages, but also is a slimmer margin, and so they're actually doing essentially the same amount of work, maybe a little bit less, but making less money at it. Just thinking about you know, where a store can go after its second or third year. Just the nuts and bolts. I think some program, some mentorship, some system that helps them get from Ingram dependence to being able to get the higher margins from publishers is probably one thing that would do a world of good, especially for those booksellers who, say, come from a different industry, use that more creative way to generate their funding, and then the kind of only education they have is the Paz and Associates, you know, new bookstore.
Even that's prohibitive because it's very expensive. You know, so
yeah, that is, yeah. And so that's one of the bridges, because you do see a lot of like stores go out of business in about 3 years, in about 2 or 3 years. You know, and you know, I'm very lucky. My store has not gone out of business, and we've been very lucky to not have too many specific challenges in terms of making, you know, keeping the lights on. We've faced the pandemic and the 2008 recession and everything, but that, I think, is that bridge. Is that getting from or getting out of those like new bookstore deals. You know, publishers will have some incentives that I think are very important, but you still got to get over those. So that kind of second or third year, I don't know what it looks like, you know, but something, and that could be trade association based. That is probably actually a great thing for regionals, regional associations to do, but not just, but just how do you get those higher margins? That's where, you know, how do you use publishers? How do you transition? And, you know, yeah, and I think that is a huge part of it. That can come from the trade associations. I think that can come from older booksellers. I think there's also a need to support that experimentation. You know, I would also love to see more support from publishers. You know, they are the ones that have the money. I mean, Bertelsmann had $200-something million kicking around to not buy Simon and Schuster. And so there's wealth there. There's wealth there. You know, as you know, that's not necessarily just a new bookstore thing. You know, 5 extra points on discount for everyone would do a world of good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else want to raise any other issues, questions? Well, we have Josh here. No? All right. Well then, I think a round of virtual applause is, there we go. But mic's off, we can't hear it, but you can see the feeling. All right, thank you, Josh. That was really interesting. I think everyone enjoyed that. Sam, did you want to mention what comes next?
Ooh, what comes next? Yes, I can. She says, flicking quickly through our diary. So our next session is also following on from Josh's talk. Actually, this could be quite a nice segue. On the 17th of November at the slightly later time of 5 p.m. Well, 5 p.m. UK time. Don't know what time that is in America. So 5 p.m. UK time. We have a talk from the Reimagining Bookstores group, who are a sort of community. Again, it's sort of, it is really nice. It should be a really nice link with what Josh has been talking about. So American bookstores coming together to sort of talk about the future of bookselling, and very much on that community focused aspect. So that's on the 17th of November. And our final one of the year will then be on, I think that is the final one of the year, in fact, isn't it, Evan? Just we've got another one. I think that is the last one of the year. But we do have, we can give you exciting teaser notice of the dates for the next Bookselling Research Network conference, which we have had confirmed as being in September, the 18th and the 19th of September 2024. And this will be held at the University of Nottingham. Andrew Thacker has volunteered to host. We don't have any details as yet. He is at this point in time working on the call for papers, which will be coming around soon, but the 18th and 19th of September in Nottingham. So watch out for that coming to your inboxes soon. But I think that's it from me, Evan.
Thank you, Sam. So I think that's it. I can highly recommend, if you're living in the United States, go down to your local bookstore and get a copy of Libromancy right away. If you're in Cambridge, Boston area, head down to Porter Square Books. It really is a great store. I was there last time I was in Cambridge. It's a reason for going to Cambridge, I think. And if you're in this country, wait till February. But you can pre-order, I'm sure.
Or you can talk me into sending you one of my many copies.
Oh, there we go. Lenora's got fun. Okay. Take care of yourselves. Have a
Thank
happy
you all so much.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya.
And you've turned off the recording?
No, I haven't, but I'm trying to find the button.